Let's make Africa the tree of life. Let's make Africa the tree of life. Hello, welcome to Josh Moments. So if you are new to the channel and then you don't know what this channel talks about Africa's history. And in today's episode, we'll be looking at one of the 7 regional economic bodies of Africa. And in this case, we'll be looking at ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States. So with that much talk, let's start today's episode. So the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, was formally established on May 28, 1975 through the Treaty of Lagos in Nigeria. Comprising 50 member states, the organization was founded with the overarching mandate of promoting comprehensive economic integration across all sectors of activity within 8 constituting countries. And don't forget, we say it is made up of 15 member countries. So ECOWAS is recognized as one of the essential pillars of the broader African economic community. Like we said earlier, one of the 7. Designed to foster the ideal of collective self-sufficiency and establish a large cohesive trading bloc through enhanced economic cooperation. So let's look at the foundational principle and core mission of the Economic Community of West African States, otherwise ECOWAS. So the original vision for ECOWAS articulated the creation of a borderless region where the population could access and exploit abundant resources through sustained opportunities. The integrated economic activity initially envisaged span numerous sectors, including commerce, industry, transport, telecommunication, energy, agriculture, and monetary and financial issues, alongside social and cultural integration. Central to this vision is the establishment of an integrated region where citizens enjoy free movement, access to efficient education and health systems, and can engage in economic activity while living in dignity within an atmosphere of peace and security. The Institutional Pact explicitly prescribed the phased elimination of intra-community barriers, which was created by colonialism. In previous episodes, we've spoken about it. Anyway, let's continue. And the crucial harmonization of industrial, fiscal, and economic policies among member states. Critically, the foundational document mandates that ECOWAS must be a region governed in accordance with the strict principles of democracy. And in simple terms, democracy means government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Made popular or popularized by Abraham Lincoln. Anyway, let's continue. Okay, so let's repeat this once again. Critically, the foundational document mandates that ECOWAS must be a region governed in accordance with the strict principles of democracy, the rule of law, and a robust good governance. This political foundation was further solidified in the 2001 Protocol on Democracy and Good Governance, which established key principles including the prohibition of military coups and the promotion of free election and human rights. The original expectation for regional integration was high, and historically, the regional body has often exceeded the initial hopes of its founders. So let's look at the institutional architecture of the Economic Community of West African States, and then where its headquarters is also based. So the former institution structure of ECOWAS consists of several key organs designed to manage and implement the integration agenda. These include the Authority of Heads of State and Government, That's the highest decision-making body. The Council of Ministers, an executive secretariat which coordinates implementation, the tribunal, the judiciary arm of ECOWAS, which is the tribunal, and the various technical and specialized commissions. So a cornerstone of the organization's funding and development effort is the Fund for Cooperation, Compensation and Development established under Article 50 of the treaty. Despite the establishment of this fund, ECOWAS has consistently faced difficulties related to stable financing. The official headquarters for ECOWAS Commission is located in Abuja, Nigeria, like we said earlier. So let's look at the tension between the ideal, what ECOWAS wish should have been done, and then the reality happening. So let's look at the tension between the ideal and operational reality. The explicit mandates for democracy, rule of law, and zero tolerance for unconstitutional changes of government highlight a fundamental political ideal underpinning the economic project. However, the operational success of ECOWAS is currently threatened by profound divergence between this ideal and the reality to the ground. The proliferation of military coups across key member states in the Sahel, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger since 2021 demonstrate that the adherence to these core political tenets is exceptionally fragile. This instability suggests that the primary challenge facing ECOWAS is not lack of clarity in its political mandate, but the severe operational difficulty encountered when attempting to uphold the principles of democratic rule while simultaneously respecting the national sovereignty of member states experiencing complex internal security and governance crises. The failure to enforce democratic norms effectively undermines the fundamental political stability required for deep and sustainable economic integration. So let's look at the status of regional integration protocols. Don't forget the main or some of the core mission of ECOWAS is to promote free movement of goods, free movement of member states, members from one state to another without any difficulty, and to ensure trade, make member states feel ease or be at ease trading with one another amidst or to overcome the barriers which were imposed by colonial rule. And let's continue anyway. So let's look at the status of regional integration protocol like we said earlier. The economic integration agenda rests on three crucial pillars. The economic integration agenda rests on three crucial pillars. And what are these three crucial pillars? So they rest on trade liberalization via the common external tariff known as CET, monetary harmonization through the eco-currency project, and ensuring the free movement of persons and goods. So progress remains uneven across these areas. So let's look at the trade liberalization and the common external tariff known as CET, CET. The ECOWAS CET represents a significant step towards creating a uniform regional market. It was officially adopted by the Heads of State Summit in October 2013 and became effective in January 2015, 2 years on. This adoption required substantial adjustment, particularly for the West African Economic and Monetary Union, an internal organization of 8 predominantly francophone states that share a pre-existing customs union and currency, the CFA franc. Implementation of the set is projected to alter trade flow substantially. Of course, when the currency member states share a common currency, that will enhance the free flow of trade among member states. So it is expected to increase the West African Economic and Monetary Union's imports originating from the ECOWAS member states, while simultaneously reducing imports from the rest of the world. However, the macroeconomic consequences vary widely. Modeling suggests that the policy change could result in revenue losses for most countries, reaching up to 2.5% of current government revenue in some cases. Although a few states might see an increase of up to 3%, for major economies like Nigeria, which has historically relied on import bans and levies charged in addition to tariffs, the full implementation of the set involved the removal of these non-tariff barriers. Okay, so now let's look at one of the three crucial or second of the three crucial economic pillars. We look at the first one being the trade liberalization and the common external tariff. Now let's look at the monetary integration and the eco currency project. So the path towards a single currency, known as the eco, has been significantly complicated by the historical structure of the region's monetary geography. West Africa is divided into two principal monetary zones: the West Africa Economic and Monetary Union, centered on the French-speaking economies, and the West Africa Monetary Zone, known as WAMS, which comprise 6 countries. And these countries are the Gambia, Ghana, Guinea, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and Liberia, who joined in 2010. So the UEMOA, or the West African Economic and Monetary Union, was explicitly formed in 1994 to counterbalance the economic dominance of large English-speaking economies such as Nigeria and Ghana. The roadmap for ECO project is highly ambitious, with the currency now slated for launch as early as 2027. As to how manifesting this could be, time will tell. So let's hope the ECO currency would be introduced for the ECOWAS member states. Anyway, let's continue. A notable shift in strategy has occurred. The ECOWAS Commission has indicated a move towards gradual adoption, intending to launch the single currency with countries that are ready, rather than delaying the project until all members meet stringent macroeconomic convergence criteria. So the ECOWAS has decided to, even though some member countries may oppose, but then it will still go on to launch the use of the eco currency, and then hopefully with time, the others who may have doubts using the eco will eventually join those who would accept during the launch of the eco currency. Don't forget, ECOWAS is made up of 15 member states, so I don't think adopting a single currency should be a problem for 15 member states. Anyway, let's continue. This approach, often termed the Ouattara option, acknowledges the practical difficulties of universal compliance. The most significant structural impediment to the ECO project remains Nigeria. The country represents roughly two-thirds of ECOWAS population and accounts for 70% of its regional gross domestic product, the GDP. Yet Nigeria's macroeconomic instability, notably its inflation rate, recorded at 27.9% in July 2025. That's very interesting. This represents the largest obstacle to achieving the necessary criteria for monetary union. A decades-long rivalry along linguistic and monetary lines, the Francophone UEMOA, or the Francophone West Africa Economic and Monetary Union, versus the Anglophone ones, prevented the swift convergence necessary for a unified currency. And all these have their traces in colonialism. Anyway, let's continue. The resulting monetary vacuum and persistent delays have recently been exploited by the newly formed Alliance of the Sahel States, which is moving towards establishing its own common central bank and currency, reinforcing the economic fragmentation of the region. So let's look at the last of the three crucial economic pillars, or economic integration agenda. The three crucial pillars for the economic integration agenda. We take two, one being the trade liberalization and common external tariff, and the second being the monetary integration and eco-currency project. So the last one being free movement of persons and goods. So the protocol on free movement was intended to foster unity, cooperation, and generate tangible economic benefits by boosting trade, tourism, and cultural exchanges among member states. Although regional travel documents such as the ECOWAS passport system have been established, implementation remains fundamentally deficient. This lack of effective implementation stems from three primary issues. What are these three primary issues? First, member states consistently impose restrictive measures under the justification of protecting narrowly defined interests, usually security, income, and the safety of their property and nationals. Second, the protocol's ideal are significantly undermined by the pervasive constant administrative harassment and extortion faced by ECOWAS citizens at internal borders. Finally, recognizing the social and economic importance of cross-border commerce, the ECOWAS Commission has prioritized support programs to regulate and formalize informal cross-border trade. The difficulty in enforcing the free movement protocol demonstrates a critical disconnect in the regional trade agenda. While the SET represents an achievement in harmonizing external tariffs, its ability to stimulate genuine intra-regional trade is constrained by the persistent reality of high non-tariff barriers, excessive tracking charges, lengthy delays in surface transport, and administrative abuse. Harmonizing tariffs without eliminating these physical and administrative or operational obstacles renders the economic benefits of the set largely theoretical than practical, highlighting a severe implementation gap at the operational border level and all that. ECOWAS economic integration pillars, or the status of ECOWAS economic integration period remains a big border to the body or to the community of ECOWAS. Yes. So implementing these three economic pillars remains a big challenge for ECOWAS. So let's continue. And let's look at the regional connectivity and infrastructure. Some of the things ECOWAS have been able to put in place and all that. So the difficult economic geography of ECOWAS. Okay, so the difficult in looking at some of the things ECOWAS has been able to put in place to benefit its member states, and then some of the challenges some of these benefits come with. So let's look at these ones. So the difficult economic geography of the ECOWAS region mandates a regional approach to infrastructure development. Many of the member states are small in scale. 8 have populations under 10 million. So out of the 15 member states, 8 of them have their population to be below 10 million. And 11 have GDPs under $5 billion per year, preventing them from capturing the necessary scale economics required for efficient infrastructure investment. Regional integration is therefore not merely beneficial, but structurally necessary for sustainable development. So let's look at the sectoral integration progress and deficit. So one, let's look at road transport. So regional efforts have resulted in the establishment of several major international gateways facilitating trade across West Africa. Despite this, significant challenges impede its efficiency. These include prohibitively high tracking charges, lengthy bureaucratic delays caused by trade facilitation issues, and notably the consistent neglect of maintenance for regional corridors by coastal countries. Regional integration promises substantial economic returns by reducing chronic costs and delays associated with the surface transport of goods. So that is the road transport sector. Now let's look at the power sector, what ECOWAS has done or is doing in that regard to benefit its member states. So the energy sector, widely recognized as having the most expensive and least reliable supply in Africa, has seen progress with the formalization of the West African power pool and the ongoing construction of a regional transmission grid. However, the system is hampered by the insufficient generation capacity, leading to suppressed demand and a critical lack of cross-border interconnectors. Analysis showed that dependent or deepening regional integration in the power sector would rationalize generational development and result in substantial savings for the WAP area, estimated at $335 million in annual energy costs. That's a lot of money member states are spending on power generation. Okay, so let's look at one of, or in continuing the regional connectivity and infrastructure development by ECOWAS. We've checked the road transport, power sector. Now let's look at information and communication technology, ICT. So in the ICT sector, pan-regional initiatives have yielded improvement in roaming services, and new projects are currently underway to enhance access and service for previously unconnected countries. Nevertheless, key challenges persist. The price for critical ICT service remain relatively high, and there is an urgent need to complete the robust fiber optic backbone connectivity and improve access to existing submarine cables. Completing this backbone connectivity is expected to result in substantial uh, price reductions. That will be very interesting. Induce greater service uptake and ultimately generate an attractive rate of return for regional community. So let's look at another effort by ECOWAS in the infrastructure development. This time around, we have, okay, so let's look at how ECOWAS will be financing this integration agenda. So the financial cost of implementing the regional integration agenda, defined as providing minimum interconnection of transport, power, and ICT grid, is substantial. Therefore, it is estimated to require sustained spending of 1.5 billion US dollars annually over a period of 10 years. Wow. Regionally, this figure is manageable, representing only 1% of the total regional GDP. Wow. However, this aggregate statistics marks a critical affordability crisis at the national level. For several individual member states, the required share of this investment burden translates. Okay, so their share of this cost burdens the annual budget of some member countries. This infrastructure investment paradox demonstrates that while the economic return on integration is proving, example 335 million saved annually in the power sector alone, the initial financial outlay is too high for smaller and poorer member states to bear through conventional means. The sheer scale of the investment, particularly the 500 million US dollars dedicated annually to power, creates a structural dependency on external donor financing. This is not something we want to be encouraging among member states of the ECOWAS. Fundamentally comprising the organization's vision of collective self-sufficiency, and the more member states depend on donor communities, the more it undermines ECOWAS' vision of self-sufficiency for its member states. So lack of adequate funding for essential infrastructure directly impedes the operational realization of key economic goals, such as benefiting fully from the common external tariff. So let's look at the security architecture of ECOWAS, how ECOWAS is able to counter, or how ECOWAS is able to respond to member states who find themselves in crisis, be it military or other coups and all that. So let's look at the security architecture of ECOWAS and how they're able to respond to peacekeeping and all that, and to counter terrorism, bedeviling member states. So ECOWAS has historically been defined by its proactive role in regional security, transitioning from conventional peacekeeping to addressing contemporary asymmetric threats. So let's look at some of the bodies that are responsible for ensuring ECOWAS, the member state of ECOWAS, are safe. So one, we have the ECOMOG. So let's look at the legacy of ECOMOG and the legal framework of ECOMOG. So the security mandates of ECOWAS was formalized by the 1999 protocol relating to the mechanism for conflict prevention, management, resolution, peacekeeping, and security, later reinforced by the 2001 protocol on democracy and good governance. ECOWAS established a powerful precedent in 1990 by deploying the ECOWAS Monitoring Group, the ECOMOG, into Liberia to end the civil war that happened in Liberia. An unprecedented step that marked regional ownership of security. ECOMOG's history of intervention is extensive, including deployment in Sierra Leone in 1997 following a military coup, Guinea-Bissau in 1999 to ceasefire mission, Côte d'Ivoire in 2003, and the critical stabilization mission in Mali in 2013, and the Gambia in 2017. The appointing mission. Okay, so the mechanism grants the executive secretary significant powers, including initiating fact-finding, mediation, appointing mission commanders, and providing logistical support. The ECOMOG experience, while groundbreaking, was not without controversy, particularly during the prolonged conflict in Liberia, which included allegations concerning airstrikes and violation of medical neutrality. The organization excelled primarily at conventional peacekeeping and intervention aimed at restoring constitutional order in then Liberia. So let's look at how ECOWAS respond to terrorism that its member states encounter. So today, the region's conflict landscape is fundamentally shaped by terrorism and violent extremism, which ECOWAS leaders have unequivocally recognized as an existential threat. The Sahel region remains global epicenter of terrorism, with threats expanding rapidly southward into coastal countries as well. In response, ECOWAS is focusing efforts on the activation and the operational readiness of the ECOWAS standby forces, which serves as the West African Brigade of the African Standby Forces. While the ECOWAS Standby Forces or the African Standby Forces was declared fully operational in 2015, challenges persist regarding political coordination and logistics. And logistical rapid deployment. So should there be an issue deploying these troops to go to aid or assist member states who are facing these challenges becomes another problem as well. Because funds to send these troops also becomes another challenge or becomes another problem. So to meet the contemporary threat, ECOWAS announced plans to deploy 1,650 personnel from the ECOWAS standby forces, designated as a rapid deployment force dedicated specifically to counter terrorism initiatives. So this force is intended to be part of a larger 5,000 strong ECOWAS standing forces brigade. Funding modalities for this force have been agreed upon by ministers of finance and defense of the ECOWAS, supporting an ambitious reported budget goal of $2.5 billion annually for a comprehensive security strategy that targets terrorism and cross-border crimes fueled by illegal mining and illicit taxation. Operational readiness is being ensured through training centers of excellence, such as the National Defense College in Nigeria, the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center in Ghana, and these provide specialized training in that regard. So let's look at the challenge of collective security. So the experience of ECOMOG in restoring constitutional order contrasts sharply with the demand of high-intensity asymmetric counter-terrorism operations now required in the Sahel. The planned deployment of the 1,600 rapid deployment forces by 2026 is a necessary step, yet its realization is intrinsically linked to the stable funding and reliable collective political will. The recent fragmentation of the bloc, driven by the declared withdrawal of these three largest landlocked states, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, directly undermines this new security focus. Counterterrorism requires maximum cross-border cooperation, intelligence sharing, and logistical access. The loss of the most affected Sahelian members severely weakens the collective capacity to mount effective security operations in the epicenter of the crisis. So the absence of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger from the ECOWAS has created somewhat a gap. I think they coming back can help ECOWAS to speed up some of its aims as early as possible. Anyway, let's continue. So let's look at the crisis of democratic norms in the Sahel schemism. So the most profound current challenges of ECOWAS, or most profound challenge of ECOWAS visibility. So the most profound challenge of ECOWAS visibility is the geopolitical schemism resulting from the recent wave of military coups and the subsequent formation of a rival regional security and economic bloc. So let's look at the failure of democratic enforcement by ECOWAS. So the 2001 Protocol on Democracy and Good Governance aimed to strengthen the bloc's political obligations, promoting democratic norms and imposing zero tolerance for unconstitutional means of obtaining power. However, the period following 2020 saw a dangerous resurgence of military coups in nearby Guinea, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. ECOWAS responded by condemning these coups, suspending the membership of these states involved, for example, Guinea, and imposing strict sanctions against these member states who engage in coup or who engage in military coups. The enforcement effort, however, created a delicate balancing act. While the organization sought to uphold its democratic principle by strengthening military actions and imposing strict sanctions, these measures often worsen pre-existing humanitarian crises, particularly in the Niger. Further, the political instability resulting from these crises diverted state resources and attention away from security operations, creating a vacuum that terrorist groups such as the ISSP capitalize on, expanding their influence, particularly in Burkina Faso and Mali. So let's look at the formation of the Alliance of the Sahel states. So in response to sanctions and perceived regional meddling, the military regimes of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger now forming the Alliance of Sahel states. So as Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger left the ECOWAS, these three nations have come together to form their own regional community. Anyway, let's continue. to get to know more about them. Or the Confederation of Sahel States, either the Alliance of Sahel States or Confederation of Sahel States, declared their intention to withdraw from ECOWAS effectively and immediately. Although the ECOWAS Treaty requires a one-year notice, which expires on January 28, 2025, the declaration in the January 2025 signaled an intent for an irreversible break. So based on the look of happenings, it looks a bit difficult for this Sahel or Confederation of Sahel states made up of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger to return back to the ECOWAS as it stands now. Hopefully, they may be able or they may decide to come back some time to come. Anyway, let's hope so. So the ECOWAS may be strengthened the more and then be able to achieve its missions and visions and all the good things they want for member states. Anyway, let's continue. So the Alliance of Sahel States has moved rapidly to establish parallel institutional structures to achieve its stated goals of regional stability, economic independence, and self-reliance. These counter structures fundamentally challenge ECOWAS authority. So let's look at some of the implications of these fragmentations. The withdrawal of these three countries poses severe security and economic challenges, notably weakening collective efforts against terrorism and disrupting regional trade flows. The fragmentation is not merely a matter of three members exiting. It reflects a deeper crisis of confidence. Stable core ECOWAS members, including Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Senegal, have reportedly shown support for the newly created Alliance of Sahel States Security Organization. This indicates a widespread belief among key states that ECOWAS' existing security architecture is either too slow, too politically paralyzed, or insufficiently capable of addressing the accelerating terrorism threat in the Sahel, thereby undermining the legitimacy of the entire security structure of the ECOWAS. So the Alliance of the Sahel States comprehensive approach, establishing a parallel security mechanism, proposing a new currency, and implementing a common external custom duty of 0.5% on non-Alliance for Sahel States imports, confirmed that the withdrawal is a strategic pivot towards establishing a functional, self-reliant regional counter bloc. This strategy move directly. This strategic move directly challenges the authority of the ECOWAS, the set and the efficacy or the potency of the ECO project, suggesting that reconciliation will be exceptionally difficult, potentially catalyzing further instability among ECOWAS member states. So let's look at some of the institutional resilience and constraints to ECOWAS operation. So the ability of ECOWAS to weather the current security and geopolitical crisis is fundamentally determined by the resilience of its institutional mechanisms, which are currently compromised by structural funding deficits and widespread implementation gaps. So the institutions of ECOWAS are more or less being ineffective. Let's put it that way. They are being ineffective towards the, or they are being ineffective in discharging their duties that is expected of them. Anyway, let's continue. So one, in looking at the institutional resilience and some of the constraints impeding the economic community of West African states, otherwise ECOWAS, let's look at the structural funding crisis being one. So the financial stability of ECOWAS is uniquely vulnerable due to its heavy reliance on single funding mechanism. What's the single funding mechanism? The community levy, a 0.5 tax applied to goods imported from non-ECOWAS member states. This levy is budgeted to constitute between 70% and 90% of the entire ECOWAS budget. The organization is currently facing a significant funding crisis because several member countries or several member states struggle to meet their obligation in remitting these levy payments. Parliamentarians have condemned the non-payment, arguing that complaint countries cannot reasonably be expected to continue subsidizing non-paying members. So if you are not paying your dues, we can reduce tariffs to you, because even when we reduce you, when you get the money, you can pay. So why reduce it? So there has been also another argument between some parliamentarians of the ECOWAS. Anyway, let's continue. The situation is particularly worrying because non-payment is not always correlated with sheer incapacity. So the fact they are not paying doesn't mean they can pay. For example, in 2022, some states undergoing military political crisis, such as Burkina Faso and Guinea, were noted as being up to date with their dues, suggesting that non-remittance is often a matter of political prioritization or selective compliance. So it's not that they don't have, but they decide not to pay. That's the member state of the ECOWAS. So let's look at the protocol of implementation and capacity gaps, or the gaps in the protocol of implementation and the capacity gaps. A long-standing impediment to deeper integration is the persistent gap between protocol ratification and the effective implementation on the ground. Core commitments such as the Free Movement Protocol are often ignored in practice. Member states frequently cite national interest, including security, income protection, and safety of nationals, to justify maintaining restrictive measures, effectively stalling regional policy at the national level. These challenges are deepen, or these challenges are propelled by a deep-seated issue rooted in Africa's colonial history, including rivalry among linguistic lines, the Francophone versus the Anglophone, the French-speaking countries versus the English-speaking countries. So those of us who are yet to know, the Francophones are the French-speaking countries, and then the Anglophones are the English-speaking countries. And the general weakness in institutional capacity across the region. Further, the complexity of managing integration is compounded by the multiplicity of regional economic groupings that operate within the sub-region, such as the Senegal River Development Organization, which create overlapping jurisdiction and complicate effective policy harmonization. The reliance on the community's levy is inherently unstable. The chronic non-remittance translates directly into poor funding. which subsequently crippled the institutional capacity required for effective monitoring and enforcement of its existing protocols, such as the trade facilitation under the set or a broader security under the free movement rules. So what does this do? This creates a vicious self-reinforcing cycle. Weak operational capacity encourages states to ignore their financial and protocol obligations, which further depletes capacity of the ECOWAS, ultimately preventing ECOWAS from fully executing its foundational mandate. So let's look at the strategic outlook and policy recommendation for the economic community of West African states moving forward. So the economic community of West African states stands at an inflection point. The crisis precipitated by the Sahel schemism necessitates a fundamental shift in strategic prioritization towards consolidation and resilience for the remaining 11 member states. So even though ECOWAS is made up of 15 member states as it stands now, there are only 11 member states. The absence of Guinea, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger has rendered ECOWAS into an 11 member state community. So let's look at some of these strategic outlook and recommendation. So the trajectory of post-fragmentation ECOWAS. Post-fragmentation ECOWAS. Wow. The organization must now plan for a necessary contraction, recognizing the near certainty of losing crucial security and landmass cooperation in the Sahel. So as it stands, it looks like the exited member states may not be coming back anytime soon. So ECOWAS need to know how to plan around them and not letting their absence affect the community that much. Anyway, let's continue. So the strategic focus must shift towards stabilizing the integration framework for the core coastal and remaining inland members, especially in light of the fact that terrorism is metastasizing southwards, or terrorism is fast moving towards the south. The monetary challenge is equally urgent. The alliance of Sahel states accelerated move towards a parallel currency and banking infrastructure risks permanently splitting or splintering the West African financial ecosystem. ECOWAS must therefore prioritize fast-tracking the eco-currency project for the coalition of the ready states. So the member states that are ready to accept the ECO should be implemented for them. Those who don't want to accept, later if they are ready, they can come and accept. So let's move on. And then ECOWAS is now targeting launching the ECO as early as the 2027. That'll be a good one. Stabilizing the region's monetary integrity and consolidating the economic core. So let's look at recommendation for political and security resilience. First one we check was trajectory of the post-fragmentation ECOWAS. And let's look at recommendations for political and security resilience. Rebuilding socio-economic ties with the Alliance for Sahel States. ECOWAS must utilize the remaining one-year treaty window expiring on January 28, 2025. It has expired already. Anyway, let's continue. To establish non-conditional diplomatic engagement with the Alliance of Sahel States. The objective must be to formalize agreements that maintain essential socio-economic ties with the Alliance of Sahel states, including visa-free travels and trade linkages, mitigating the economic fallout of the political divorce. Now let's look at refining the sanctions policy, how ECOWAS may want to implement a sanctions to member states that violate its rules. So let's look at refining the sanction policy under the policy recommendations. So refining the sanction policy. Future policies related to unconstitutional changes of government must be re-evaluated. Sanctioning instruments should be deployed, should be developed that impose severe costs on military regimes and associated elite without generating humanitarian crisis that undermines ECOWAS moral authority and fuel narratives of external aggression. So let's look at the ECOWAS standby forces, and then how they are able to counter terrorism. So the commitment to deploy 1,600 personnel of the Rapid Deployment Forces by 2026 is critical. The organization must secure external partner commitment from the UN, the United Nations, the African Union, and European Union to meet the ambitious 2.5 billion US dollars annual budget required for comprehensive counter-terrorism operations. Full resource allocation and continuous training via full resource allocation and continuous training must be guaranteed to ensure the force is operationally capable of high-intensity warfare. So let's look at the recommendation for institutional and economic strengthening. So structural funding reforms. The current community levy mechanism is structurally dysfunctional due to the non-remittance because member states are not paying their dues. ECOWAS should explore implementing a decisive reform, potentially transmitting a direct levy collection by a supranational ECOWAS authority, or establishing swift, severe political penalties such as immediate loss of voting rights at the ECOWAS parliament anyway, and the exclusion from institutional appointment for member states that remain substantially in arrears. So if your country is owing, you won't get any position in the ECOWAS. I think that won't be a bad idea. Innovative infrastructure financing. So to overcome, that is also another recommendation to the innovative infrastructure financing. To overcome the critical infrastructure investment gap of $1.5 billion annually, ECOWAS must develop innovative externalized financial mechanism. This could involve issuing regional infrastructure bond or establishing public-private partnerships that are guaranteed by major multilateral partners such as the World Bank and the European Union. Such mechanisms are necessary to meet the investment requirements whilst alleviating the unsustainable fiscal burden of 5% to 25% national GDP, currently placed on smaller member states. Looks like the ECOWAS is plagued with many challenges, and there are a lot of changes and recommendations to be done by the ECOWAS. Anyway, So we end today's episode here. Our topic for today was the Economic Community of West African States, one of the 7 regional economic bodies of Africa. So before we go, if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, and share this video. But before we go, don't forget, one day our lives will become history. What will posterity say about you? See you in the next episode.